Okay. So, what made you sure that you wanted to be a vet?
Um, I was one of the people who always knew I wanted to be a veterinarian. So I was very blessed when I was little. In all my kindergarten books, it says I want to be a mom and a vet, and that's it. So I definitely don't really know why, like the why, besides I just always had this, I was always drawn to animals, and a lot of people always say they're passionate about my animals. And I kind of found that following throughout my life. And it helped that my parents were both in the medical field, because then I started falling in love with medicine. So I was able to combine, both my loves for animals and medicine, and find a job where I could apply it. And I definitely explored other ideas because my application stats weren't the greatest. But at the end of the day, I knew this was the path I wanted and where I could see myself the happiest. So
I also just realized that we didn't really do introductions.
that's okay.
So I'm Hannah. I'm Vice President of the Pre-Health Liaison.
I'm Piper. I'm the current chair of the PreVet liaison.
And I'm Deanna. I am a second year veterinary student at Western University in California.
Okay. Piper, do you have your next question?
Yeah. So do you think that PreVet at Simmons adequately prepared you for the challenge of vet school?
I think it did in its own way. When I was attending Simmons, there wasn't really guidelines, and I was basically told getting into veterinary school is exact same as medical school, which challenged me when I was on the pre-health liaison board to start looking into what I actually needed to do, because I just kind of floated by. I was like, oh, I'll just do whatever all the medical students were, but that wasn't actually the case. And I was very blessed. I don't know if you have, I forget her last name, Jackie was there as an advisor, and she started looking into veterinary program requirements and what Simmons had that equated to offer. The one thing that if I could go back, I would definitely take an immunology course. That is still something I struggle with, and that was one of the things I was like, vet schools don't require it, so I'm not going to take it. But that's the one thing I definitely wish I did. And in terms of our science courses, especially, I'm a big advocate of the OChem. I don't know if Dr. Lee and Dr. Gurney are still teaching it.
Yeah, they
but
are.
They were awesome. And I think they really put you in that mind of research. And that's one thing people don't think about when going into veterinary medicine. And you need research for a lot of residencies and internships, or if you want to specialize later on. It's also a good thing to get involved in when you're in vet school. So I think from that aspect, they really prepared you. In our science courses, I ended up having to repeat a few just to improve my application. And just the depth that our school went into, you could see a difference. So I think that definitely prepared me. But when you go into veterinary school, you also remember we all come from different backgrounds. So I have friends who took courses I didn't take, and they're better at a subject because they knew that. But you eventually all catch up after your first year and kind of get on the same page, and you learn your strengths and weaknesses and kind of work with each other on that. But it for sure prepared me.
Awesome.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience applying to veterinary school?
Yeah, so I applied twice. When I was a junior at Simmons, I think I was very overwhelmed with the idea of applying. So I decided I'm going to take a gap year. I've heard everyone else was doing it. I knew my grades weren't the best. So I decided after graduation, I was going to take a break, which I didn't do. I do recommend actually taking a break. And just, getting a couple extra hours, but not overwhelming yourself, for sure. I ended up working 2 jobs as a veterinary technician and then doing shadow hours later that year, because I was just wanted to keep on strengthening my application. And so I applied the first time, it must have been my senior year, so 2016. And I applied to 8 schools, I believe, and I got denied from all of them. I didn't even get interview invites. I did get one like waitlist to interview. And so when I got denied, it was definitely disheartening. So I took another gap year, which was unintentional. But I used that time to continue working and getting more hours. One of the things I found most beneficial in that time was after the application processes, a lot of the schools offered reviewing your application. So I did that. And I also kind of learned through like the rejections, like I got more specific and kind of figured out what I was actually looking for veterinary school. Like I said, this was something I always wanted to do, but I didn't know what I wanted out of a school. When I went to Simmons because that's where my scholarships were. And so I didn't really have an idea of what my ideal school would be. So by getting rejected and seeing their responses and kind of learning more and having more time to look into each individual institution, I kind of shaped an idea. And when I applied a second time, my pool shrunk. I think I applied to 4 schools, and 4 or 5. And I got accepted to the St. George because I decided, initially I was very like, I'm not sure about a Caribbean school, but I decided it might not be my only option. So I decided I applied to St. George. I think I applied to Tufts. I applied to Western and Midwestern. And so I initially was accepted to St. George on the condition that I gain more equine hours, which I ended up doing that fall, and then got accepted in for their class of 2018, their class of 2022, the fall 2018. And I got waitlisted for Western, and after I had interviewed there, and I was kind of holding out because I heard a lot of stories about being pulled off the wait list. But I ended up accepting my seat at St. George and remaining on the wait list for Western. And about a month before school started, I got pulled off the wait list and just made the decision that Western was where I really wanted to be. And also helps that I wouldn't have to go out of the country and all that fun stuff. But yeah, had its up and down, and I think everyone has like a different story. So it's definitely good to listen to everyone's experiences for sure.
Okay. So Boston has a lot of like opportunities for medical students, as we know, but what are some opportunities in Boston for vets that you were able to take advantage of when you were at Simmons?
Yeah, so when I was at Simmons, my first animal-related job per se, I wasn't paid, it was an internship. Unfortunately, these things are unpaid. I started volunteering at Franklin Park Zoo. So I've volunteered at their hooves and horns department. So I think it was once a week I would just go in and it was mucking stalls, and I got to learn about different animals and kind of learn about like what was going on in their life and help prepare their diets. There wasn't much veterinary interaction per se, unless one of the animals was sick, then the veterinarian would come in. And then that following year, I ended up doing their internship program. So that I worked for like 8 weeks, I believe, in their Birds World department. And that department's definitely more hands-on than being with, giraffes and lions and whatnot. So I got to work with the birds and work with the keepers and kind of get an idea of that keeper job. And when the veterinarian came in, I was able to get a little bit of hands-on experience. And I also did a internship project, which they said could be on anything. So the girl I was also interning in my department, she was interested in animal behavior and becoming a trainer. And so she did a project with one of the birds that was imprinted on training them. And I did my more medical, where we had this case of a hornbill who just had some skin condition where his skin was flaking off and they were constantly changing his bandages. So I just designed a little ace bandage wrapper. So that was fun. And then after that, I worked at actually where Hannah works at Boston Veterinary Clinic. I just happened upon it. I was looking for speakers to come to professionals night, and I was like, this looks like a cool place. Like, I put my name in, and it coincided that they were a new veterinary clinic, and they were looking for somebody to do reception. So I started as a receptionist there, and as I slowly worked there more and more, I kind of started as an assistant and then a technician. And by the time I left, I was training on the surgery and anesthetic monitoring. And then the other thing that also got connected through pre-health liaison is I had reached out to veterinarians at the MSPCA Angel, specifically one in the zoo and exotics department, ended up coming on and speaking on one of our panels. And over spring break, I reached out to her and ended up shadowing in their exotics department. So that was a pretty cool opportunity. So those were the ones directly in the Boston area. And my other opportunities were, I'm from Bridgewater originally, which is on the South Shore. So we're in that area. So I shadowed my dog's veterinarian. There's a equine place out there. So I shadowed there when I need my equine hours. But there's definitely a ton of hospitals. You don't always have to go to the big ones like MSPCA Angel. And we also have a lot of specialty hospitals around the area, which is one thing I didn't know until I was working as a technician, that if you're not in the city, you don't have to be in the city per se. But definitely reaching out and just sending an email, just saying, hey, I'm PreVet and I'm interested in like shadowing or potentially getting a job or learning to be a technician. Here's my resume. Please reach out to me if you're interested, and just putting your foot in the door somehow. That definitely helps.
Cool. Thank you.
What was the hardest class that you had to take in undergrad? And then how did you overcome that? Or maybe how did it help you once you got to vet school?
My hardest and favorite class was organic chemistry. The organic chemistry one I actually did pretty well in, but organic chemistry 2 I got a C, and I ended up retaking Orgo completely before getting to veterinary school. And my biggest challenge with Orgo is that I put a lot of pressure because it's the class, you know, your pre-med, your pre-vet, whatever, it's the class you have to pass. Everyone calls it the class that weeds everyone out. Like, it's so hard. And I put a lot of that anxiety in my head. So I developed testing anxiety. And I found it very difficult, and I never had an experience with testing anxiety before, so I didn't know how to handle it. So I just kind of powered through, and it was just how I was, which ended up affecting my grades at the end of the day. But I think that made me a stronger person, because going into my first year of veterinary school, all of those worries came back, and you know, they're like, this is the most stressful thing you're going to go through. This is the hardest, you know, they kind of put those thoughts in your head. And I think I was able to grow because I knew I had already been through that experience. I knew, like, I didn't get a good grade, but I still got to the place where I wanted and still worked through it. So I think just kind of building that resilience from having that, you know, I mean, a C is not a horrible grade at the end of the day. But just having the experience of a situation where I had interpreted that I had failed and that my dream was ruined, and then being able to still achieve that dream by just picking myself up and doing it all over again, definitely helps, because you need to kind of have a thick skin and be able to pick yourself up off the ground, because it is tough, and it definitely is not the easiest thing I've ever attempted to do in my life. But as long as you know, have that ability to pick yourself up again and continue at it, even though, you know, you might have not done what you wanted to do. It's always a good mentality to have, for sure.
Thanks.
So I wanted to ask, just like kind of out of curiosity for myself, what is your favorite animal to work with and why?
My favorite animal to work with? Well, being in veterinary school, I'm in anatomy lab a lot, so I haven't worked with many animals. It's sad. But Right now, I think just working with dogs and cats. I've worked with, like, I love exotics and that's where my heart kind of lies, but sometimes this is like the straightforwardness of working with dogs and cats. Like, it's nice because it's something that's known, especially when I'm away from my dogs are barking right now. I don't know if you could hear them. But when I'm at school, just being away from my pets is like one of the hardest things. So working with dogs and cats for sure. One of the fields that I find very fascinating, but I also don't have any experiences, you can, like, fish medicine, which I think is just like so amazing that somebody can do surgery on a fish. So I think that's cool. So that's something I hope to do for sure as well.
Cool, thank you.
How has veterinary school been so far?
An adventure. It's like anything. You know, I think I still have the days where I'm like, whoa, like I'm here and I'm in vet school, and you know, I made it to this point, and now I'm kind of, as I'm heading into my clinical year, for my third year this fall, and now I'm like, oh, somebody's allowing me to do this. Like, okay, it's definitely very surreal for sure. And it has been fun. I think a lot of experience from my peers and, like, from what I've heard, and I've experienced talking to veterinarians, are like, oh, it's horrible. You just study all the time. You never get out. You don't have a social life. And I think that's kind of a stigma in our field. Like, I am in class a lot, and I'm lucky to be in a program where I'm not in a didactic learning setting. So I'm not in school 8 to 5 every day. I mean, there are days, but there is flexibility, and, like, you do, like, get really close with your classmates, and you kind of form your little veterinary family in a way. So you have that social system, and then you also have, you know, I'm not from the area, so I don't have many friends in California, but like, my friends from California, they're still able to hang out with their family. I fly back for holidays, and I have family on the West Coast that I fly to as well. I can do a quick weekend. It's really about planning and making sure you're organized and just having that balance. So there's definitely a way to do it. And but yeah, it's been fun and up and down and stressful and, like, surreal. So
So I feel like you might have already kind of answered this with the immunology class, but if you could go back and tell yourself in undergrad one thing, like one piece of advice, what would you tell yourself?
besides immunology, I think I wouldn't have been a bio major, but that's more of just, like, my personal interest. I had no idea that biochem existed, and I also didn't know much about my biomedical engineering. So that was something that I wish I had explored my degrees. I was just like, oh, you know, I'm pre-vet, I have to be bio, I have to have a minor in chem, you know, and I wish I sought something that I, like, really enjoyed, like psychology or biochem or biomedical engineering, and kind of had fun with it, because I think that would have given me a different perspective towards veterinary medicine. And I also wouldn't have been in that mindset of, like, oh, like, I got to do school, I got to do well, I got to, like, be a certain cookie cutter image for veterinary school. Whereas veterinary school nowadays, even more so, aren't looking for that cookie cutter applicant. They're looking for somebody with varied experiences. And, you know, you can, if you want to be like a English major, like, do what you enjoy for sure, but, and then get the prereqs. And I know so many students who have done different degrees, or they're on their second degree, or, you know, somebody I worked with at Boston Vet, she was like an English lit major and ended up changing, did a post-bac program, and it's going to be graduating soon. So there's no one way to do it for sure.
Thank you.
What is your biggest piece of advice that you would give for those currently in the process of applying to veterinary school? I know this applies to me, but I was also wondering.
Yeah, I think, I'm trying to think. I definitely put off the application towards, especially my first one. I ended up submitting, like, the day of the deadline at, like, 11:59. I would definitely like piece it out and set goals. So I think I tried to like push it off. I was like, oh, I'm so nervous. And when you submit, except for the schools, I think that have like rolling admission or just kind of keep their application open, it doesn't really matter if you submit on the deadline or before, but just kind of having a plan and not saving it till last, because that way you have time to get people to check your essays. One thing I did the second round that I kind of did the first round too was I really organized my hours and set them up, and took time to like look at my descriptions of, because I think you had to enter your descriptions of like what you did at that job or experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I really set it up in like a nice Excel sheet, and kind of I was like, okay, this week I'm working on this experience and entering the data. And that way, like I felt a much better sense of ease the second time when I submitted a month early. It was a lot less stressful. I wasn't scrambling at the last minute. I think that first one I was like up to like 10 finishing, like putting the cherry on top of one of my essays and having my dad read it. So definitely don't procrastinate for sure.
So in terms of like actual like vet school, is there anything in particular that has been like the most challenging for you?
For me, and it sounds silly because it depends on what school you go to. So a little background, Western U isn't a didactic learning. We do PBL, which is problem-based learning. So we have, throughout a week period, we have a case, and depending on what time it is in the year, based on our blocks, it's on a body system. So for example, this block, we're in our cardiorespiratory and repro block. So our first several cases were related to the cardiorespiratory system, and next week we start doing cases towards repro. And you work in little groups and try to work through the case, and then you get assigned like homework or learning issues, as we call it, based on that. And we have very limited lectures. Like we only have what we call BSL, which is just like a supplemental to help support our learning for understanding that case. And then we have some like clinical skills, but mostly the clinical skills are hand-on. So for me, the toughest thing is paying attention in lecture. I think having 2 years off for school and choosing Western was probably my best choice because I'm not in school 8 to 5. I don't think I could sit through 8 to 5. So I think one of the most challenging has been like these first 2 years, and I'm hoping my clinical hands-on learning is going to be much better. But obviously the whole point of going to veterinary school is to go sit and lecture. So it is kind of a silly answer, but it's definitely the most challenging part because especially I can only imagine at the 8 to 5 schools where, you have to make sure you're engaged and motivated to learn. But I think being in a curriculum where I'm challenged constantly is a blessing and a curse because it's preparing me to have that clinical mindset, but it's also a lot of work.
Where do you sort of see yourself after vet school?
That is an amazing question because I'm trying to figure that out now. I have no idea. If you asked me when I was entering vet school, I would have said, I want to be a zoo exotics vet. Like that is for me. I love a zoo exotics. If you asked me when I was little, I would have said dog and cats and bunnies. Like that's all I ever wanted. But now I honestly don't know. I really love, dog and cat medicine. I love surgery. The best thing about vet school is that it opens your world to just veterinary medicine. And I don't know if it's different for you guys, but when I thought of veterinary medicine, I was like, you go and you're dog and cat vet. So when I was introduced to the zoo and exotics world, my mind was blown. I was like, you can do this for real? Like this is a thing? So I think I'll probably end up meshing my two loves and doing like a general practice with some exotics. But I also have pondered the idea of doing a surgical residency or specializing somehow, though I don't know in what. But the fun thing I learned from somebody when I was shadowing, she was an extern. She had just graduated doing her externship at this equine vet practice I was shadowing at. And she was telling me, she's like, yeah, I don't even know if I want to do equine. So it was so casual, but it made me feel like I didn't need to know, which was great, because here she is like 1 year out of veterinary school and she's still not 100% sure. And I think that's one of the best things about the field, is that you're not even limited to just like the clinical options either. You can do, with all of the stuff going on, you could be working for like the public health department. You could be working for FDA. You can be working for all these companies and still be a veterinarian. You don't necessarily have to be working in a clinical setting, which is awesome. So there's too many options, but that's what I got to narrow down to, at least.
So before I decided to switch majors and be pre-vet, I was pre-med for like, I convinced myself I wanted to do it, but the actual reason was because I wanted to make money, like a lot of money. But then I had like an epiphany over break and was like, I don't want to do that. Like I like animals, I want to work with animals. But what would you say to the other people in like a similar situation to me that are avoiding doing pre-vet because they're afraid of like the financial aspect of it?
It's hard to speak on that just because everyone's in so many different situations. But if, in the ideal world, I say just go with what's going to make you happiest. Obviously there's other things that confound that, like finances, and finances are a huge thing and they should definitely be considered when applying to veterinary school. Who knows what the next year is going to bring with everything going on, if that's going to affect it. But, we do make a decent amount of money as a veterinarian, but compared to doctors, we're not making that money in the same amount of time. And we're not able to pay off our loans. And I know a lot of veterinarians who, are still, they're in their 50s, 60s, still working towards their loans. And that's something that weighs on them heavily. But yeah, in an ideal world, I would encourage you, do it, follow your dreams. I'm big on like, if it's not going to make you happy, why are you putting yourself through that? And like you said, you had like a reflection, and I know plenty of people I went to Simmons with who were pre-med and they were doing it for this reason or that reason, but they weren't doing it because it was something they actually wanted and they felt their heart was going towards. So I think, in the grand scheme of the things, like at the end of the day, being happy in what you want to do with your life is the best thing. But finances are definitely something that need to be taken seriously, because the debt it's fun.
Yeah.
You get that no interest for a couple months. I'm appreciating that. And definitely just finding ways to be smart. I ended up, my senior year, took a personal finance class at Simmons, and I still use all that knowledge. At Simmons, I was a very avid online shopper, but, I got a little smart. I started saving money. I worked a lot to save up money so I could, didn't have to take out loans for living expenses. So that's one way, and just being smart about your loans. And I don't know about other schools, but my school they have a good financial aid team, and they actually do, if you want, you can meet with them and go over your personal budget and kind of be smart about it. And then with the loans, you can always, if you take out too much, send some back too, just to kind of help offset that. So you're not just having extra loan money for funsies,
What's like one of the most like rewarding things that you've found about the veterinary profession?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say, and it's kind of a stereotypical story, but, back when I was younger, it was always like, I want to be a vet because I don't like people, right? And that's like a story for everyone you hear. You never tell anyone that you think that. And weirdly enough, when I started working as a technician, so after I worked at Boston Veterinary Clinic, I went to my local veterinarian and worked as a technician there. And between those two experiences, I actually found out that working with people is why I kind of love it. And the reason being is that you have that shared bond between your client. You both love animals, and seeing, people always come in, they're like, oh, you probably think I'm so weird for talking to my cat or my dog. And I'm like, no, I do it all the time. I have full conversations with them. And I think the most rewarding is just, getting to make like a bond with your client and connect with the client over something you both care about. And it's, especially touching if you get the experience to, see that animal as a puppy and then see them later in life. And it's heartbreaking, but I think just having that human connection too is like one of the most amazing things. But like I said, if you asked me when I was like in 6th grade, I would have told you humans are gross.
I have exhausted my question list.
I have also. That was my last one.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for answering everything.
No problem. And please feel free. Like, I'm friends with you on Facebook. Piper, feel free to add me on Facebook. I'm open to any questions, or if you just want, advice on the application. I'm not the best at the application process, but I have friends who are like really active on the PreVet AVMA page. And are really good at supporting students and stuff. So if I can't answer a question, I can definitely find somebody who can help you out. But yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.